This episode of the Paddock Pass Podcast is brought to you by Fly Racing. Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass Podcast presented by Fly Racing. On this week's pod, we've also got a special edition where we sit down with Brad Binder ahead of the 2021 season. Steve English, Adam Wheeler and Neil Morrison on the show. And Adam, before we start to speak with Brad, what's your impressions of him as a MotoGP rider?
Well, an amazing start to his MotoGP career, but I think if there's one rider that could have made a shock in 2020, then it was him. Of course, the biggest surprise was Joan Mir winning the World Championship, but the determination and the kind of application that we've seen from Binder since he matured in the Moto3 class, taking that amazing victory in Jerez, which I think all three of us can agree was one of the most staggering in recent times. Through Moto2 and a badly broken arm, we've seen glimpses of the kind of character and the fortitude that's needed to succeed. So, I think it's refreshing to have a rider of Brad's caliber and ilk, but also his nationality and his personality in the class. I think it's a big asset.
And Neil, what about yourself? What's your impressions of him?
Yeah, Adam already touched on that, but something along the same lines of just how bloody minded he is. I mean, we've seen a couple of occasions during his career where Brad probably shouldn't have achieved the results that he did. And I certainly think of the year that he challenged for the Moto2 Championship in 2019. He really had no right to be there. Had no right to be winning races for most of that year, but it was just his refusal to kind of give in and basically accept the limitations of his machinery that carried him almost to the World Championship. But I think he's a cool guy. He's a unique character. He's pretty laid back, but on the surface, that is, I think, deep down, he is kind of as dogged and as aggressive as they come.
He's quite refreshing to talk to as well. He's quite direct and to the point, got a pretty decent sense of humor. So it's, as a journalist or somebody that's kind of out for an opinion or a story, he can be good value. But I don't think we should make, too light of his achievement last year. I mean, he was more than 2 seconds adrift in his first test in Valencia as a MotoGP rider, and then, had some fantastic success throughout the season and made a big milestone for Red Bull KTM Factory Racing. So, and that again was on a motorcycle that many people expected to be there or thereabouts and not actually fighting at the front. So, big credit to him.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that always stood out for Brad is that he was one of those riders that came through the Mahindra Moto3 school. You're on a poor bike or an underperforming bike, you've got to get the most out of it. And he found a way to get to the front. And then whenever he got onto a good Moto3 bike, a good Moto2 bike, a good MotoGP bike, he's been able to win. So he's always had that ability to be able to get the most out of himself and his package. And that's where it's always interesting to sit down and talk to him. And we had the chance to talk to him just after the opening 2 days of MotoGP testing in Qatar. So let's hear from the man himself, Brad Binder. Brad Binder joining us on the Paddock Pass podcast. And Brad, we're talking to you just after the first couple of days in Qatar, and it's always a bit strange when you jump back onto a MotoGP bike after the off-season break, but this is even weirder for everyone. It's been an extra long off-season, and those first couple of days must have been a little bit hectic for you.
Yeah, it's always a little bit difficult to get back into things when you get back for the first time, but all in all, I think it was really amazing to actually ride this bike again, and it was so much fun. It's funny that you almost forget a little bit of the small tricks that you need over the winter time. So the first couple of days were a little bit hard. Unfortunately, I ended up throwing it down the road a couple of times, which didn't help me much at all. But in general, so good to be back, and I'm really, really excited to get these next 3 days started.
I know that Neil and Ad obviously have a lot of questions for you where we'll go into a lot of details, but just before we start off with Neil, I wanted to ask you about those couple of crashes, because obviously we all talk about it the whole time about how testing's great, but we always read too much into the times. We see guys that are fast in the winter tests, and suddenly when the season starts, they're a lot further down the timesheets. You were quite far down the timesheets compared to where everyone expected. So for you, is it the opposite, where you just sort of say, you're building up towards the start of the season? That's where it all counts.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think we can look into the times too much, especially mine, because the first day I ended up crashing before I put in the new tires as well. So that wasn't ideal. So then I ended up losing a set, and we had to put in our last tires for the day just when the sun was practically up. So yeah, that wasn't ideal on the first day. And from then on the second day, we used the harder compounds in the morning, put in one good set of tires, did a few laps, tried a few different things. And at the end of that run, I ended up crashing on the last couple laps of my second set for the day. And yeah, I ended up crashing on my third lap of my new set, and then both my bikes were quite broken. So that was my day finished pretty much on day 2. So yeah, a little bit more difficult than I would have liked for sure. But all in all, shit happens, and it's just going from here.
Hi, Brad. How's it going?
Good, bud. You?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. Good to see you. It was interesting last year to hear some of your MotoGP competitors describe your riding style, and some noted that you were still riding in some ways like a Moto2 machine. And I was just wondering, have you been using the test to evolve your riding style? I guess that's a continual process. Do you feel like you're still riding the MotoGP bike like a Moto2 machine?
I'm sure. I think I do in some ways, but at the same time, I think our bike's a little bit different to some of the others, and you almost have to. And we were going through some data now, just before I walked in here, and it definitely looks like I'm trying to be too smooth and too round and all of that, and it just doesn't work for us. So the only way to really get the benefit out the bike is to be that little bit more aggressive and really get the thing squared up and on the throttle as hard as you can. So yeah, it's a little bit different for sure. I definitely did put in a bit of focus to try and adapt a little bit more to this bike over the off season, but it seems that the way I was doing it seemed to work a little bit better for me than what I was trying to do, at least the last 2 days.
I just wanted to know, could you just tell our listeners a bit about what it's like to be in a factory team? Because I know last year would have been your first year. And you would have probably not wanted to move the furniture around too much or be too demanding and just, try and absorb as much as you can. But now you're into your second year. What's it like being in that pit box? I mean, do you have the possibilities to demand a lot? You have quite a huge amount of staff, listening to your every kind of comment. What's it like being in there?
I mean, for sure, at the beginning, it can be a little bit overwhelming. You kind of stop after a couple runs, and they expect feedback, and you're kind of like, yeah, I'm just trying to get up to speed. It's been a long off season, but yeah. To be honest, I tried to keep things as simple as possible. I like to try whatever whatever we have, and just give my honest feedback. Better, worse, I think there's potential, I don't think there's potential. And yeah, I like to let, we have each job in the team is pretty much for one specific guy. And the reason they're there is because they're the best at it. So for me to try and get too involved, I find just really, it's a waste of energy sometimes. And yeah, I mean, often there are things that I like to try. And obviously, I'll get my point there. Well, I'll definitely get my points across. But yeah, I think it's really important to understand that I have an amazing team behind me, and I've seen it from the beginning of last season, and they know exactly what they're doing. So yeah, I'm that guy that's got to that sits on the bike and got to try it all. And at the end of the day, all of the comments go back to them, and then they sort it all out for the next time around.
Brad, I remember when you were in Moto2, you admitted that you maybe weren't one of the riders that was automatically fast whenever you stepped into a new category. It needed a bit of time for you to figure it out in your head and to get up to speed. Yet you won your third ever MotoGP race, which was, a real surprise for many people and a bit of a turn up for the books. I mean, what was the difference in MotoGP that allowed you to be right on it from the very start of the season?
To be honest, difficult to say. I mean, I was shocking at the beginning in GP. Shocking. Like the first 2-3 days, I was stone last. And it's funny, then all of a sudden things started to make sense, and I could really understand what I had to do to improve my lap times. And it's strange because you change some small things and it goes such a long way. I think it's all about understanding how to use the power and how to get the best out of the package. So I think it's safe to say maybe in this off season I got a little bit rusty with some of these small things, and I think it's one of those things. The only way to really learn it or to get it right is to do more laps again. It is true of my career. I've never ever been the quickest guy from the beginning. It's always taken me a while to really get things under control and understand the things. But once I do, I never seem to really go backwards again. So let's hope that all that I've learned last year, and I'm still continuing to learn. I see that it's never ending, really. And I think it's going to help me in the long run. The main thing that I've really noticed so far is each time we go to a new track as well, there's so many different points about it. And now also, hopefully once this whole COVID story is a thing of the past and we start to go to all the new tracks again, at least I'll have that experience and understanding of the bike before we get to these new circuits.
Just to take on from that, Brad, then obviously with Danny Pedrosa as the test rider for the team, that's obviously been a massive benefit for KTM. We've talked about it a lot in the podcast, just about how having a fast test rider really helps the race riders to get all the data. You mentioned about when you started on the GP bike that it was tough for you. Those early season races, we had a pre-season test or a pre-event test in Jerez. KTM obviously tested in Brno in Austria as well. How big of a benefit was that to be able to then give you the foundation and then the confidence to really kick on at the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, we're so fortunate to have Danny and Mika as our test riders. They definitely do a lot of the job behind the scenes for us. It's great when you're trying something. It's our first time trying it, but they've already done many laps on it and they have a good idea of that it's working well, or what's exactly to expect. And I think that makes our lives definitely a lot easier. It's definitely funny to think that two of the three races that KTM won at last year, we had done a lot of laps at, and I think that also helps. It is definitely important to have a good base there, but there are also many other tracks where I think our bike was extremely strong. So going forward this year, I think it's so good to have everything pretty much very similar to last year, and just give us some time to really try and get the absolute best out of our package. And also myself personally, I feel that I have a lot of learning to do still, and I have a really long way to go. So we're just going to have to take it one step at a time and see where we end up.
Brad, as someone who's new to the class, what's it like having to race some of the riders that you've been watching for years? I mean, when you're coming up to overtake Valentino Rossi or last year Andrea Dovizioso, is there a small part of your brain that is trying to compute exactly what you're doing there? I mean, I know you weren't racing Marc Marquez, but is there a part of you that thinks, wow, I just passed him, or I'm just having to fight with this guy? I mean, were you starstruck a little bit?
It's funny, it's strange because I honestly thought it would be like that. It was a little bit like at the first laps around, Valencia, when you're riding behind these guys, it's people that you've only really watched on TV your whole life. Now you're on track with them. So it is really awesome. But it's funny, like in my first race going into turn 1 in Jerez, I went around the outside of Rossi and I never really even realized, so it's funny, you don't care when you're in the moment. You just really want to go forward, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter who it is or what it is, but you just know where you want to be. And I think everything just falls into place. At the end of the day, we're all here. We all want to win. And regardless how long you've been here or what machine you're on or who you are, you just you're all fighting to be on top. So it's funny how things just go out the window quite quickly.
Brad, I remember back in 2016, the year before KTM entered the MotoGP class, The top brass of the factory were speaking in Austria. And I think Mr. Pirer made some comments that he thought the project was capable of winning the MotoGP within 5 years. And everyone rolled their eyes, I think, and thought, well, that's a bit silly, a bit ambitious, overly ambitious. But obviously you had experience of working with KTM and working with the likes of Pitt and Mr. Pirer at that stage. Did you think back then that it was fanciful? Are you surprised, I guess, with how rapidly KTM has got to the front of MotoGP?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. It's a yes and no answer because, if you look back at them in Moto 3 and Moto 2, straight away they've brought out a machine that's always been extremely competitive, and obviously MotoGP is a whole nother ball game, and it's clear to see at the beginning it obviously wasn't very easy, but the one thing I've learned with KTM, if they've set a goal and they have they know exactly what they're there for. KTM, no matter what it is, whether it be motocross or now road racing, they're there to win, and that's why they go racing. So for me, it's no shock at all that they expected it, and they set these big targets, and 90% of the time you see them achieve them. So I have great respect for all the guys in the company, and they're an insane bunch of guys, but it's super, super cool to check what they've achieved so far, and I'm sure it's very, very far from over.
Brad, less than half of the MotoGP grid have won Grand Prix in each category, and you're one of them. From the outside, Moto 3 looks ridiculous. It looks like chaos. Moto 2, we all know, is such fine margins between the riders. And MotoGP, of course, has that mix of manufacturers, and it's so tight. But can you talk about the intensity of the competition in MotoGP? Is it far harder to deal with compared to the other classes?
The main thing I've noticed so far with MotoGP is that, in Moto 3 and Moto 2, things are always tight. And I find that things are always like you really can make the difference just trying a little bit harder or doing some small things different. Whereas I find in MotoGP, the difference from track to track, there's always one manufacturer that works better, or if the tires are a bit different, one manufacturer might be good, another one might struggle a little bit. And in general, I found it really hard to understand as you go from one weekend to the other. One weekend you can be super strong, and the next weekend you're really struggling to crack crack that top 10 in all the sessions. And there's so many more things involved in MotoGP. I've noticed it's not just, you're the quickest guy on track and your bike's working great, and there you go, you can win the race. There's the tires, which tire is going to last the race, which tire works for us, does it work for everyone else, or what works for them might not work for us on the day. And there's a lot more moving factors about MotoGP that makes it a lot more difficult as a rider as well, because you almost have to accept when things aren't going great. You need to just deal with it, and do your absolute best and take the maximum possible. But I found always in the smaller categories there was always a way to do it, and we could always figure it out. Whereas it seems you're playing with this really fine line, and it's super difficult to find that last tiny bit, especially if things aren't really working out for the weekend.
Brad, obviously Miguel steps up to the factory team for this year. You guys have, in my opinion, a bit of a unique relationship in that you've been teammates in all three classes, and not just that, but in Moto 3 and in Moto 2, when Miguel was fighting for the championship in 15 and 18, you, on occasion, acted as his wingman and almost sometimes sacrificed maybe your own results for the good of Miguel and the good of the team. I was just wondering, is that because you and Miguel get on so well, because you like Miguel, he's a good guy, or is that just because, it's that team ethic that you have in KTM, or is it a mix of both?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely we've been teammates since 2015. Had a couple of years where we've been in separate places, but it's super cool to have Miguel as my teammate again. It's always great to have him on the other side of the box. He's always been super fast and always pushes really hard. So definitely keeps me on my toes, keeps me working hard. And yeah, I think in Moto 3 and 2 especially, he was always, when I came in here, was 1 year, one step ahead of me, and it took me too much time to always try and catch up. But now in MotoGP, I feel like it's maybe a little bit of a different story because there's nowhere to really run from here or to go from here. So this is the pinnacle, and we all got to really try and do our best from here. That's the crazy thing with MotoGP. It's the fastest guys in the world on the best bikes, and it's something that I really, you kind of go to bed at night and you think this is crazy. This is something you've always dreamed of, but it's super hard work at the same time. There's in days things aren't going well, times are tough as well. It's difficult to try and find your way back to where you want to be. And when you do, I always find that you come back much stronger. So it's funny how things work in MotoGP, and I'm really looking forward to just carrying on this path together. It's going to be awesome to have him as my teammate again this year, and I'm sure we can push the project on nicely.
Brad, just to ask you one last question for myself. We've actually got Daz coming onto the pod in a couple of weeks' time as well for a Moto3 preview show. Just wondering how important it is for you to be able to have someone that that's going through the same things you're going through, and the same for him as well. Where obviously we've talked to Sam and Alex Lowe's in the past about how each of them has always gone through something similar to the brother, and they're able to give them some insight, they're able to help them forward with it. How important is that for you as well?
For sure. It's funny, over the years you see, like, I see my brother struggle with things I've struggled with, and I've always been I was in GP for 3 years before here, after 3 or 4 years already. So I'm quite a bit older than Darren, so I have a bit more experience. And sometimes I see him struggling with things, and I think back and I can think of when I had the exact same situation. And of course, you always find a way to make things better and make things work. But it's funny because it's so easy to just go and say, hey, you need to do this and this, and it will be better. It can only help. But at the end of the day, I find you always got to just deal with it yourself and figure it out in your own way, in your own time. And as much as I try to give my little brother some advice now and then, it's difficult to really. It's like anything, it's one thing to say, but it's another thing to do. So it's funny. I try to help him wherever I can, but sometimes I think it's best just to let him be. And he always seems to figure it out himself anyway.
And just one last question for me, Brad. Obviously, South Africa had great success in Grand Prix back in the late 70s, early 80s, but there was a bit of a barren patch for the country until you and Darren came into the World Championship. Does that, in some ways, add a little bit of pressure to you, the fact that you and Darren are basically the sole representatives of South Africa, because all eyes from your country are on you guys, or does it act as a boost? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and how that is?
It's difficult to say. It's sometimes, obviously, with us being the only ones from South Africa here at the moment, you want to do an incredible job for not only yourself but your whole country. And I think on one hand it helps a lot to be the only ones from our country, because I think, especially in, maybe not so much now, but earlier in our careers, where I think you'd find, say, there's 5 or 6 Spanish guys, and you, that guy, coming 5th or 6th all the time, you're going to fall out at some point. And I find that almost maybe as a South African, they want other people from more different nationalities in MotoGP. So I find that maybe at the beginning, when things weren't going well, we stood more of a chance to really learn and try, and we had more time to fix our weak points to try and get further towards the front. And so in one hand, I find that it's really been a positive, but on the other hand, it was so difficult to get here because we have no support from South Africa at all. We have, you can win our local championship 500 times and you're not going to get anything. So it's funny, the only way to really try and make a career in MotoGP or in bike racing in general, regardless of what category, is you have to come to Europe. And I left South Africa to start racing this side when I was 12 years old already. So it's been a long time since I've raced at home.
Yeah, you really do need to forge your own path into the Grand Prix paddock. But Brad, a big thank you for joining us on the podcast this week.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. All the best.
Cheers, Brad. Good luck.
Fly Racing believes that our most important obligation is to provide the highest performing products to riders worldwide. Offering both on and off-road products for every price range, Fly Racing is committed to reshaping expectations. Fly Racing revolutionized the off-road world with the Formula helmet, featuring Rheon technology. Visit flyracing.com and @FlyRacingUSA on Instagram to learn more about the innovation that can keep you protected in 2021.
Really interesting to sit down and talk with Brad for 15, 20 minutes there, just to be able to get his thoughts on what he's gone through. Obviously, we're recording this after the first test of the season, and there's a bit of work to be done, as we alluded to in the pod, or in the interview, but certainly for KTM, there's lots of reasons for optimism for them for this year.
Yeah, he's not getting flustered, is he? I think one of the things I took from the interview as well was the fact that, the part about South Africa, and Neil's question, I mean, maybe it was because it was the last one of the interview, it's fresh in their mind, but, the fact that I've interviewed many sort of South Africans as well, and MXGP and Australians, and, there's that cliched, they've given up everything to move to the other side of the world, and therefore there's this kind of narrower window for them to succeed. There is an extra kind of, grit or some kind of determination, or I'm trying to find another cliche here to throw at it. But the Binders do seem to be in this position where they literally throw everything at it. They've got to go for it. Otherwise, there's maybe another 4 to 5 Spaniards coming through the FIM Seth Junior World Championship. Steve,
so close. So close.
Almost got it.
I got it the first time. I knew that was it. I lucked out. So the point is, there's plenty of European closer to home riders that will nudge them out of their saddle. So there is an aspect of that mentality that must go into it.
Yeah, the FIMC EV Repsol Junior World Championship ad. But Neil, for you, obviously, we heard from Brad during the course of that interview what he has to go through. But it's always interesting whenever you look at the KTM line of succession as well. We've talked about it on the pod already, and you mentioned it as well when you asked him about being teammates with Miguel all the way through. But from Red Bull rookies into the Moto3 class, into Moto2, into MotoGP, that's special to be able to see that progression that's available for riders.
It is really special. Yeah, it does show that KTM system is working fantastically well, exactly as they set out for it to work. And I also think, for Binder, it must be in some ways a bit comforting because he steps into a team next to, Miguel Oliveira for this year. But it's just like another step. It's not like something completely new. We know that Aki Ayo runs his Moto2 and Moto3 teams, like pretty tight ship. In many respects, it's a mini MotoGP machine. A mini MotoGP team. I think it's beneficiary for when they do arrive to MotoGP. There's not so many. Well, obviously, there's a big change with the bikes and everything like that. The number of people in the garage, but it's more a natural progression rather than just a total shock to the system. May have been one of the factors that led to Brad getting up onto his feet so quickly as a MotoGP rider.
Obviously, Neil, I mentioned that we're going to have Darren Binder on the show as well before we get to the start of the season. But I found it interesting that whenever I asked Brad about, trying to help each other, that it was pretty clear that the Binder brothers need to take their own path. It's very clear that they're very different characters, Darren and Brad. But it's also interesting that whenever you look at someone like Brad, the Aki Ayo school really worked for him. Tough love, get the work done, figure out a solution. Whereas maybe for Darren, what's going to work is the Petronas team, where it's much more about a family-orientated approach, finding a way to just get the most out of their riders. They seem like much more of a cuddly team, for want of a better phrase, compared to the Ayo team. And that's what's interesting for me in the comparison between the two brothers.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of get the impression that with Aki Ayo, unless you're starting the year as a challenger, as someone that can fight, then you might not get that armor on the shoulder that you need. But if you're on it from the start, then things are going to work out okay for you. And Brad was obviously fortunate enough to be quick from the very start with that team. Whereas Darren, he had a couple of he had a terrible start to the year with Haki, and it didn't really work out. But yeah, I think again, that's just a sign of the two different characters. Brad, as I mentioned earlier, he's a tough character. He doesn't necessarily need love all the time. He expects a lot from himself. And I think Darren, although he's super laid back, you can maybe see in his GP results that, he needs a bit more love around him to be super fast. And there's also just the fact that they've developed, I think, at different stages. Darren's coming into his own now this year as a really strong Moto3 rider. Brad was able to do it just a little bit quicker. So, I think they'll both get there in the end, to be honest.
Well, coming to 2021, Brad and Miguel obviously have the wins for KTM. It was something that Pol Espargaro you didn't achieve, even though you could say Pol was the stronger rider towards the end of 2020. So for both of you, who do you think is going to emerge, top of the tree in that team? Is it going to be Miguel? Because even though they mean nothing, the initial testing time seemed to indicate that he's on the pace straight away with the factory bike. Or do you think Brad's kind of doggedness in the battle will eventually earn him more points?
Miguel's probably going to be more consistent, and I think Brad could have very high peaks. And I think overall they'll probably come out pretty much the same as one another. I think if I was to put my fiver down, I'd probably fiver down who's going to be in front of each other at the end of the season. I'm going to go with Brad, because a bit like what we talked about in the interview, he has always gotten better the more time he spent on a bike. So I think he's got a lot of progression possible there through the course of the season. We saw lots of flashes of what he could do last year. I think even if everyone talks about Jerez 1 where he had the pace to be on the podium, I always think that's a little bit of a out of context argument, because everyone can be very fast whenever they're not having to deal with the hot front tire that you get in Jerez and things like that if you're in traffic. So, it was a little bit clouded by that, but it was still very impressive on a Grand Prix debut to be able to do that. So I think Brad has got a lot of room where he can make some progress for next year. What about you, Neil?
Yeah, I think they're going to be quite closely matched, although I would say that Oliveira probably has the consistency thing worked out just a little bit better. Also, we're going to be going to Portimao early in the season, third race. And, if Miguel can get a couple of decent results in Qatar, he could be leaving Jerez as, one of the top 3 or 4 guys in the championship because of his expertise around Portimao, and that would surely be a massive boost. So, Miguel just has the experience, although he's missed out in World Championships 2 occasions. He does have that experience of putting consistency together. Brad does as well, to be fair, in Moto3 and Moto2, but I think Miguel's just a little bit, has that extra year of experience. I think he'll know how to put a really consistent campaign together.
And Ad, you're not getting off the hook. Who you have coming out on top of that as well?
I was just about to say that the orange fence is really comfy. In fact, it's a great view from up here. And because we're not allowed really into circuits, you can see most of the tracks. So I'm just going to stay sitting right here on the fence. No, I love. I love seeing Brad race. He has got a kind of a distinct style and language on the bike. But Oliveira, of course, has that extra, not even a full season, maybe 2/3 of a season experience. And as we've seen through the classes, he always seems to excel a little bit first. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of a pecking order in 2021, and then let's see if they're both, to pick an Alex Rins comment. Let's see if both riders are together again for 2022.
Yeah, we'll wait and see what happens with the KTM battle. It's going to be interesting once it gets underway. So, Adam, a big thank you to you for joining us on this Paddock Pass podcast presented by Fly Racing Special, where we spoke with Brad Binder. So, thanks for joining us, Ad.
Cheers, Steve. Cheers, Neil.
And thanks for joining us, Neil.
Thanks very much, Steve. Cheers, Ad.
Thanks very much to everyone for supporting the podcast. Patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast. For as little as $3 a month, you can help support the pod and allow us to have a lot of extra content through the course of the season, such as these interviews with Brad Binder. So patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter @Paddock Pass Pod, where you can drop us some feedback as well. So Until the next time on the Paddock Pass Podcast presented by Fly Racing, a big thank you once again for listening.
This episode of the Paddock Pass Podcast was produced by Jensen Beeler, David Emmett, Steve English, Neil Morrison, and Adam Wheeler. It was edited by Brian Burnett. Music is provided by The Liberty. All inquiries can be sent via email to team@paddockpasspodcast.com.